Sarah Thompson's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her mahogany desk as she reviewed her son Marcus's college applications. The late autumn sun cast long shadows through the home office window, illuminating floating dust particles that danced in the golden light. As the wife of Millbrook's first black mayor and a dedicated elementary school teacher, she took pride in raising 3 academically gifted children despite the constant scrutiny that came with their public position. Her eyes narrowed as she examined the financial aid forms. Something wasn't adding up in their joint account statements. Sarah pulled up their online banking portal, her confusion deepening as she noticed several large transfers she hadn't authorized. The amounts were oddly specific: $247,832.45, $183,921.67, $295,436.89, all transferred to numbered accounts she didn't recognize. The house creaked around her as she dug deeper, uncovering a trail of encrypted documents hidden in a password-protected folder on James's desktop computer. Her husband had always been careless with his passwords, using their anniversary date for everything. 15 years of marriage had taught her his habits, both endearing and troubling. As she decoded the files, her hands began to tremble. The transactions weren't simple accounting errors. They were carefully orchestrated transfers of city development funds, each one disguised as legitimate project expenses. The money flowed through a complex network of accounts before landing in their joint account, then disappearing into those numbered accounts she discovered. Sarah's throat tightened as she heard James' car pull into the driveway. His heavy footsteps on the porch triggered memories of their early days, his charismatic smile during their first meeting at a community fundraiser, his passionate speeches about uplifting their predominantly black neighborhood, the pride in their community when he became mayor. Now, each step filled her with a growing sense of dread. "Sarah, you're working late," James called out, his voice carrying that smooth politician's tone that had won over so many voters. He appeared in the doorway, suit jacket slung over his shoulder, campaign smile firmly in place. The same smile that had once made her heart flutter now sent a chill down her spine. "James," she began, forcing her voice to remain steady, "I found something while working on Marcus's college applications." She turned the screen toward him, watching as his expression shifted microscopically, a tightening around the eyes, a slight clench of his jaw. "Oh, those? Just some routine fund allocations for the new community center project," he replied smoothly, loosening his tie. "You know how complex city budgets can be, honey." His dismissive chuckle felt like ice water in her veins. Sarah looked at her husband of 15 years, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw something that made her blood run cold: calculation behind the charm, cunning behind the confidence. As he stood there, bathed in the dying sunlight, she realized she was seeing the real James Thompson for the first time. "I think we both know that's not true," she whispered, her finger hovering over a particularly damning spreadsheet. The air between them crackled with tension as James' practiced smile faltered for just a moment, revealing something darker underneath. The police station's anonymous tip line rang for the 3rd time that morning. Detective Lisa Martinez rubbed her temples as she listened to another caller describing Sarah Thompson's suspicious behavior. Like the previous tips, this one was detailed, precise, and somehow felt orchestrated. 27 calls in 2 weeks, all pointing to the mayor's wife. At Millbrook Elementary, Sarah felt the weight of suspicious glances as she walked through the halls. Her classroom, once filled with 28 eager 3rd graders, now held only 19. Parents had been quietly transferring their children, citing vague concerns about recent developments. The remaining students sensed the tension, their usual energetic chatter subdued. "Mrs. Thompson." A small voice drew her attention. Jasmine, one of her brightest students, stood clutching a permission slip. "My mom says I have to switch classes." The girl's eyes welled with tears. "I told her you're the best teacher ever, but she won't listen." Sarah's heart clenched as she knelt beside Jasmine's desk. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the doorway. Principal Warner stood there, his expression carefully neutral. "Sarah," a word. The other students watched wide-eyed as she followed him into the hallway. Meanwhile, across town, James Thompson stood at a podium, his voice booming through City Hall. "Corruption has no place in our beloved Millbrook," he declared, cameras flashing. "When I discovered financial irregularities in our development fund, I knew I had to act." His face conveyed perfect concern as he added, "Even when the trail leads somewhere unexpected." Back at school, the teacher's lounge fell silent as Sarah entered. Her colleagues, people she worked with for over a decade, suddenly found their phones fascinating. Only Gloria, her mentor of 12 years, met her eyes with pity. The coffee in Sarah's cup grew cold as she sat alone, overhearing whispered fragments. "Always seems so honest, and can't trust anyone these days." That afternoon, an envelope appeared in Sarah's mailbox. Inside, printouts of bank statements showed transactions she'd never made, but her signature, perfectly forged, graced each page. Her hands shook as her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Channel 5 breaking news. Don't miss it." On screen, James stood with his arm around Jennifer Carter, head of the city's finance department. "We've uncovered disturbing evidence," Jennifer announced, her rehearsed concern matching James's. "Years of systematic fraud, hidden in plain sight." The camera panned to a wall of documents, Sarah's name highlighted in damning yellow. As Sarah drove home that evening, she noticed a police car trailing her. Outside their house, reporters lurked with cameras. Through the window, she could see James giving an interview in their living room, his expression grave as he gestured toward family photos. The same photos from which, she noticed with a chill, her face had been carefully removed. The city council chamber hummed with tension as Sarah sat in the back row, her dark blue blazer feeling like armor against the hostile stares. Security cameras tracked her every movement, their red lights blinking accusingly. She'd come despite her lawyer's advice, needing to see for herself what James would do. Council President Richardson called the emergency session to order, his gavel's sharp crack echoing through the mahogany-paneled room. James approached the podium, his Italian leather shoes clicking against marble floors that had been bought with diverted community center funds. "Members of the council, citizens of Millbrook," James began, his voice carrying that perfect mix of authority and heartbreak he practiced in their bathroom mirror countless times. "Today, I come before you not just as your mayor, but as a husband who's been betrayed." Sarah watched the performance with growing nausea, the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his tie. Practiced. The way he paused to compose himself, rehearsed. The catch in his voice when he mentioned their children, perfect theatrical timing. "When I discovered the extent of the financial irregularities," he continued, pulling out a thick folder, "I was shocked. But when our forensic team traced the transactions," he paused, letting the tension build. "When they traced them to accounts controlled by my wife, I was devastated." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Sarah felt dozens of eyes burning into her. A photographer's flash caught her expression of stunned disbelief. A photo that would make tomorrow's front page. James unveiled a series of charts, each one meticulously doctored to implicate her. Sarah recognized her signature on documents she'd never seen, dates that coincided with times she'd been teaching, meetings she'd supposedly attended while chaperoning school field trips. Therefore, James's voice cracked perfectly. "I am not only calling for a full investigation, but I'm also announcing my immediate separation from Sarah Thompson." He turned, meeting her eyes across the chamber. "I cannot allow my personal tragedy to compromise the trust this city has placed in me." Security footage captured Sarah's slow rise from her seat, her dignified walk toward the exit. It caught the moment she stumbled slightly, when James added, "Officers, you may proceed." 2 policemen stepped forward, blocking her path. That evening, Sarah stood in the rain outside their home of 15 years, staring at changed locks and a manila envelope. Inside were divorce papers, restraining orders, and a note in James's familiar handwriting. "You should have stayed in your lane." Her phone buzzed with texts from their children. Marcus was being kicked out of his dorm. Jessica's scholarship was suddenly under review, and little Michael's private school was reconsidering his enrollment. Each message twisted the knife deeper, showing just how thoroughly James had orchestrated her destruction. Public defender Maya Rodriguez stared at the mountain of financial records scattered across her desk, her third cup of coffee growing cold. Every document she examined revealed another layer of Sarah Thompson's apparent guilt, each piece of evidence more convincing than the last. Too convincing. Look at this. Maya pointed to a transaction record as Sarah sat across from her. Your signature appears on a withdrawal form from March 15th. She pulled up Sarah's teaching schedule, the same time you were giving a presentation at the state education conference. 200 miles away. Sarah leaned forward, squinting at the signature. That's not possible. I was. She stopped as Maya held up a photograph from the conference, showing Sarah at the podium. The timestamp matched the withdrawal exactly. A gentle knock interrupted them. Maya's assistant entered with a plain manila envelope that had been left at the front desk. Inside, they found a USB drive containing security footage from City Hall, showing James meeting with known money launderers after hours. But when Maya tried to copy the files, they corrupted instantly, leaving only fragments of data. Classic James, Sarah murmured, remembering how her husband had majored in computer science before switching to political science. He always said the best evidence is the kind that destroys itself. Across town, at Millbrook High School, Jessica Thompson stood before the school board, her voice trembling but determined. My mother taught me integrity, the 16-year-old declared, tears streaming down her face. She taught first grade while earning her master's degree. She volunteers at homeless shelters every weekend. James, sitting in the front row, reached for his daughter's hand with cameras rolling. Sweetheart, we're all devastated by your mother's choices, he interjected smoothly. The board members nodded sympathetically as Jessica jerked away from his touch. Back in Maya's office, more evidence arrived. Bank statements, wire transfers, offshore accounts. Each document told a compelling story of Sarah's guilt. Maya noticed a pattern. The evidence wasn't just thorough, it was perfectly thorough. No loose ends, no contradictions, no holes. Real crimes are messy, Maya mused, pinning documents to her caseboard. This is too clean, too perfect. She connected strings between the pieces, stepping back to see the larger picture. It's like someone wrote a story and planted evidence to match it. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Storage unit 247. Password, redemption. Her heart racing, she and Maya drove to Millbrook Storage Center. Inside Unit 247, they found a treasure trove of original documents proving James's guilt, all turned to ashes by a timed incendiary device moments after they opened the door. Marcus Chen's fingers hovered over his keyboard in the dimly lit newsroom of the Millbrook Chronicle. The young journalist stared at his screen, where an encrypted email from a former city employee in Riverside revealed James Thompson's identical scheme from 5 years ago. Another black woman had taken the fall, another life destroyed. Chen, my office now, Editor-in-Chief Richards bellowed. Inside the office, Richards closed the blinds. Drop the Thompson investigation, he ordered, sliding over an envelope. The mayor's office is threatening our advertising revenue. Marcus picked up the envelope. Inside was a check that could pay off his student loans. He dropped it back on the desk and walked out. Across town, the Black Community Action Coalition gathered in Mount Zion Baptist Church. Reverend Angela Waters, her silver locks framing a determined face, addressed the packed pews. They thought we wouldn't notice the pattern. Her voice resonated through the church. 3 cities, 3 black women, 3 cover-ups. Social media exploded as Sarah's former students launched #JusticeFormist. Video testimonials flooded TikTok and Instagram. A doctor crediting her for his love of science. A single mother describing how Sarah had paid for her child's school supplies. A troubled teen revealing how Sarah's intervention had saved him from gang life. James's carefully cultivated political allies began distancing themselves. City Council member Rodriguez suddenly remembered suspicious meetings. Police Chief Parker developed concerns about the investigation's focus. The Chamber of Commerce president had a crisis of conscience about campaign contributions. The protests grew larger each day. Reverend Waters led thousands through downtown Millbrook, their chants echoing off glass skyscrapers. No more scapegoats. No more silence. National news vans lined the streets as hashtag Millbrook corruption trended nationwide. Marcus Chen worked through the night, connecting dots across state lines. His wall of evidence grew. Yearbook photos of James with college hackers, bank records showing identical fraud patterns, testimonies from former employees. Each revelation cost him something. His apartment's windows were smashed. His car's brakes mysteriously failed. His mother's small business received surprise health inspections. Your career is over, James's smooth voice warned during a chance encounter in a parking garage. You'll never work in journalism again. Marcus smiled, thinking of the dead man's switch he created, documents set to release automatically if anything happened to him. Maybe, he replied, but your career is finished too. That evening, as protesters surrounded City Hall, Sarah's children led the crowd. Jessica's voice rang out through a megaphone. Michael distributed evidence packets to reporters, and college-aged Marcus coordinated with national civil rights organizations. Above them, in his office, James Thompson watched his empire beginning to crack, making frantic calls to rapidly disappearing allies. Courtroom 302 of the Millbrook County Courthouse buzzed with tension as Maya Rodriguez approached the witness stand. Former mayor's wife Patricia Chen sat rigidly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The gallery leaned forward, phone silenced but cameras ready. Mrs. Chen, could you describe your relationship with James Thompson during his time as deputy mayor in Riverside? Maya's voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. Before Patricia could answer, District Attorney Wilson shot up. Objection, Your Honor. Prior unrelated allegations are inadmissible. Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed as he studied the prosecution's unusually aggressive response. Your Honor, Maya countered, I have evidence connecting identical financial schemes across 3 cities, each time with a black woman taking the fall while Mr. Thompson walked free. She produced a thick folder. Bank records show. Approach the bench. Judge Harrison ordered. As the attorneys huddled, Sarah watched James from across the courtroom. His face remained impassive, but his left thumb tapped his thigh, his tell when things weren't going according to plan. The judge reviewed Maya's documents, his expression darkening. I'll allow it, he declared. James's thumb stopped tapping. Patricia's testimony unfolded like a mirror image of Sarah's nightmare. The same charming smile, the same financial schemes, the same betrayal. He convinced me to sign documents I hadn't read, Patricia revealed. When the fraud was discovered, he had evidence ready to implicate me. My husband lost everything defending me. During cross-examination, D.A. Wilson attacked Patricia's credibility, suggesting financial motivations for her testimony. But the damage was done. Jurors scribbled notes furiously, several glancing at James with newfound suspicion. The courtroom dynamics shifted dramatically the next day when Vanessa Murray, James's current mistress and City Hall secretary, took the stand. I have proof, she declared, pulling out a phone. Voice recordings of Mayor Thompson planning. The courthouse lights went out. In the darkness, a commotion erupted. When emergency power kicked in 30 seconds later, Vanessa and her phone were gone. Security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during the blackout. Your Honor, Maya pressed, this is clearly witness tampering. But without Vanessa or her evidence, the judge's hands were tied. That evening, as Maya prepared for the next day's proceedings, a manila envelope appeared on her desk. Inside were photos, her teenage son at soccer practice, her daughter walking home from school, her parents' Florida retirement home. A post-it note read simply, choose wisely. The jury had only been deliberating for 2 hours when Maya's phone buzzed. The text contained 3 attachments. Marcus's college acceptance letter marked REVOKD, Jessica's full-ride scholarship termination notice, and Michael's private school expulsion papers. A 4th attachment showed their home's mortgage suddenly in default. You have 30 minutes to accept the plea deal, the message read, or your children lose everything. In the courthouse bathroom, Sarah splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection. The woman who looked back had lost weight, gained gray hairs, but her eyes held the same determination she'd shown her students for 15 years. Mom, Don't do it. Marcus stood in the doorway, his young face aged by stress. We'll figure something out. Jessica and I can work. Michael can switch schools. No, Sarah cut him off, her voice firm. You won't sacrifice your futures. That's not what I taught you. She straightened her jacket, checked her lipstick, small gestures of dignity before surrender. The courtroom fell silent as Sarah and Maya re-entered. James sat at the prosecution table, radiating smug confidence. Security cameras captured the moment in high definition. Sarah Thompson, head held high, tears gleaming but refusing to fall. Your Honor, Maya's voice cracked slightly. My client wishes to change her plea. Judge Harrison peered over his glasses. Mrs. Thompson, do you understand the implications of pleading guilty? I do, Your Honor. Her voice carried to every corner of the courtroom. I accept full responsibility. Each word felt like swallowing glass. The plea agreement appeared before her. 15 years, no possibility of early parole, full restitution of $4.7 million. As she lifted the pen, Sarah caught James' reflection in the polished table surface. His lips curved in that practiced smile she'd once loved. Mrs. Thompson, Judge Harrison began his sentencing speech. This court has seen extensive evidence of your crimes. Sarah tuned out his words, focusing instead on her children in the gallery. Marcus held Jessica, who silently sobbed. Michael, too young to fully understand, clutched his siblings. The gallery watched, stunned, as officers approached with handcuffs. Sarah extended her wrists, the metal clicking with terrible finality. As they led her away, she passed James's table. For a brief moment, their eyes met. In that look, she conveyed everything. She knew his guilt, knew his schemes, knew his soul. And for the first time, James Thompson felt afraid. 6 months into Sarah's sentence at Millbrook Women's Correctional Facility, City Clerk Thomas Reynolds lay dying in Mercy Hospital. His cancer-ravaged body could no longer contain the weight of his conscience. I helped him forge everything, Reynolds whispered to Marcus Chen, who sat beside the hospital bed with a digital recorder. Every document, every signature, every transaction. Mayor Thompson made me do it, not just to Sarah, to others before her. His confession filled 3 hours of audio, detailing a decade of corruption. Marcus's expose hit like a thunderbolt. The Millbrook Chronicle's website crashed from traffic as the story went viral. Mayors estimate si tragédia of Blake We Women expose screamed headlines nationwide. His investigative series, Prejudice and Power, The James Thompson Conspiracy, would later win the Pulitzer Prize. Inside her cell, Sarah watched on a small TV as James held an emergency press conference. His usual smooth demeanor cracked when reporters questioned him about Reynolds' deathbed confession. The camera caught his hand trembling as he loosened his tie, his trademark smile failing him for the first time in public. Mom's coming home, Jessica announced at a rally outside the courthouse, her voice carrying over thousands of supporters. The crowd erupted as FBI agents emerged from City Hall, carrying boxes of evidence. Michael, now 13, live-streamed everything, his social media campaign #FreeSarahThompson trending globally. But James Thompson had one final card to play. The morning before his arrest, he vanished. Offshore accounts emptied, private planes traced to shell companies. A network of corrupt officials and co-conspirators suddenly falling like dominoes across 3 states. Sarah found unexpected purpose in prison, teaching other inmates to read and write. Her cell walls covered with letters from former students and supporters. She began writing her memoir, Beyond Reasonable Doubt, Race, Justice, and Betrayal, which would later become required reading in law schools. Your mother's case has exposed deep-rooted biases in our justice system, Reverend Waters told the Thompson children during a prison visit. Her sacrifice is becoming a catalyst for change. She gestured to the TV where congressional hearings on judicial reform were underway, sparked by Sarah's case. 1 year, 3 months, and 14 days into her sentence, Sarah walked free. The evidence from Reynolds' confession, combined with Marcus Chen's investigation, had unraveled every false charge. Outside the prison gates, hundreds waited. Former students, parents, supporters, and her children. James Thompson was eventually caught in Buenos Aires, living under an alias, but his capture was merely a footnote. Sarah's story had transcended one man's crimes, becoming a movement for judicial reform and racial justice. As she often told her students during prison teaching sessions, truth has patience. It simply waits to be discovered.